Maybe, picking off of the last thread that you were talking about before answering this question was about ROI, right? And I think one of the aspects that's linked very closely to ROI is GTM, right? Which is how do you sell? Now, as I've been looking at a lot of these software companies who are trying to build for traditional industries, obviously one of the core questions apart from technology and product is what are you actually selling? Right? Because it's not like the business that exists today is not functional, right? All these businesses are operating, they're all thriving, they're all doing well, whether it's a logistics company, whether it's a hospital business, whether it's a bank or an NBFC, whatever it may be, right? And when you go ahead and you have to now convince the organization to, pay you for an AI product or an AI solution that you want to deploy, my question always is, where is the money coming from? Are you replacing existing software solutions today? Probably very hard, right? Like no one's going to be replacing. I mean, at least I don't see it happening very easily that you would end up replacing something like SAP or Salesforce on day one, right? Maybe there's probably a journey to it, unless, of course, the companies themselves evolve in a more AI native manner and their products become friendlier, less monolithic, etc., etc. But that's one angle, right? Like it's a rip and replace. You have an existing budget, you're spending it on something. Hey, I have something that's much better according to a bunch of operational and functional metrics. You might as well give me the money. The second is where the solution has to pay for itself, right? Like your example with LaneServe, you're able to do more with less. You're able to get better margins, better rates negotiated. You're creating value, which then you have a right to sort of apportion, right? And I found that this is not always very obvious or very simple or trivial because, as you said, right, sometimes the value propositions are embedded under layers. It's not very clear. So, would love to understand, all of the companies that you're viewing, the ones that you decided to invest in, from a GTM perspective, from a value proposition communication to their ICP to their buyer. How are some of the best companies going about it, right? How do you really sharpen that focus, cut through that clutter? Because there's hundreds of companies probably today trying to pitch to every enterprise saying, take my AI solution for fraud management, for calling, for this, for that, right? So I wanted to understand a little bit how should people think about value proposition? How should they think about and its linkage to GTM? Would love to understand that because that's honestly a problem that I'm also trying to wrap my head around as we evaluate software startups currently at Picus as well.
So the capital usually finds its way to the highest momentum businesses, right? I think especially venture capital. Venture capital is very sort of क्या बोलते हैं, no qualms, no shame type of capital. So it's very sort of, it doesn't have any sort of moral dilemmas, things like that. It's typically as an asset class, it follows the highest momentum companies or opportunities, that are there, which means the ones that grow faster are better, you know. And I think if you just by the same argument, the opportunities which are closer to demonstrating ROI very, very clearly are the ones which are getting the most venture capital. It's not that the next ones are not, then I think the ones which are a little bit more embedded also get it, but the next tier of capital, or maybe they have to try harder, they have to go longer, they have to demonstrate longer, right? Then I think the next one. And then there are the horizontals which have their own world. I think so far, if you look at sort of the capital that has gone on the last couple of years, a big portion of them have just gone in infrastructure, which is like foundational models and things like that. So I think the enterprise AI adoption capital is still only beginning to flow in, literally in the last year or so. And we are in very early stages of that. So again, it will follow the use cases, which is also linked to the GTM, which are very easily understood. And I think they are usually like LaneServe, which are very, very sort of easy to understand for a layperson. They're not software sales. So if you look at SaaS, software as a service, this is really service as a software. It's kind of, that's the term people are using. So SaaS has kind of, changed its meaning, flipped. So like LaneServe is not selling software. They're selling a service, which is fully software enabled, right? Which is basically load booking service. So I think, but there are plenty of opportunities like that. Like we have at least 8, 9 companies like that. So for example, we have a company which does debt collection. Again, in the US, simple use case, you have credit card debt, which are, if it's a small amount of debt, less than $500, it's very expensive to collect once it goes past 30 days, 60 days, right? So most banks just write it off, or they would basically sell it to a collection agent for 20 cents to $1. So our company, we have a company called Finance Ops, which basically has an AI agent which collects this debt. Very simple, again, very ROI based. They only get paid once they collect, and get sort of a percent of the collections. So very easy for any buyer to try it out, and implement it. I give you the SAP example, the procurement to pay. Again, sort of it's very predicated on the success of the procurement cycle. We see healthcare cases, we see sort of prop tech cases. We have a company which does, sort of it's a broker tool to make a first call whenever somebody posts a new property, because whoever makes the first call, usually gets the business. So I
Yep.
think it's just so these are very high ROI, high impact ROI cases. I think today we are in the part of the evolution where people are still finding enough of these and getting after these, and they are the ones who are getting the most attention, and they are the easiest to sell also because the pitch is so easy, right? And I think there's a clear ROI, and hence some of these companies are seeing like hockey sticks, which have never been seen before. Like if you look at, I was hearing one of these Vicey guys, and Vicey in its entire history of last 15, 20 years had only one company which grew, consistently 10% month on month, or was it 20% month on month? There was only one company in entire history, which was, I think, Airbnb or something. And now I think the entire cohort on an average is going 20% month to month. So it's just like a totally different landscape, because the growth, because there's such a simple sale. Software sales is hard. It's like concept selling. You try something, ROI will come, da, 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 da. It's still an automation pitch, right? But this is really literally a service pitch, right? It's a full business use pitch, which is very hard to ignore. The ROI is immediately there,
Yep.
and priced in. So I think if you're an entrepreneur today, I would say today, look for those kind of cases where you can do a full automation, deliver a full business value,
Deliver an outcome
outcome
as you would say.
as an outcome, versus like a software. But it will change. We will be in a few years, there will be a situation where a lot of these will be done, and then we'll come to the next level of these and the next level of these. But today, I do think there's enough opportunity.
Got it. Understood. No, I think that's super interesting because the way that I've also seen it is stuff like implementing SAP, etc., was necessary because your business simply could not scale without an ERP beyond a point, right? It was a growth limiter in some ways if your organization had to run using people heavy operations and spreadsheets and pen and paper, and it was not like consolidated, queryable, manageable from that perspective. But I think right now, as you said, the companies all run, right? They're not dying. Their base level capabilities to grow their businesses exist. So then it's about finding where you can allow them to either grow incrementally or faster, or to like reduce their losses and costs. And of course, it's impossible to ignore the entire context around software today because it's more outcome oriented as opposed to point solution oriented, that it can actually replace labor, right? So you're not just going after IT spend, you're actually going after the entire human capital spend that companies may potentially make. But of course, as you said, it's harder to do in certain spaces and easier to do in certain others. Maybe moving into the next part, which is sort of like understanding, right? Like we talked a little bit about, the whole service aspect, and going back to Global Logic, what people call forward deployed engineers in all these AI and SaaS companies today is essentially, in a very large extent, what all IT services have done for decades in some ways, if you think about it, right? But today you have software companies who are no longer just deploying software, but in many cases, they also need to send people to be able to drive that transformation, right? I think my friends in the US, they keep getting like insane amount of recruitment calls for forward deployed engineer roles. I think companies like Perplexity, OpenAI, etc., the number of people that they want to hire. Palantir obviously sort of pioneered the model in the SaaS era. People are like hiring absolutely like crazy. But at the same time, you're moving away, or not moving away, you're adding an operational and a people complexity beyond technology and product complexity, which SaaS has traditionally done. Your margin structures and cost structures consequently may look very different, right? So any sense on how you're seeing this evolve, right? What Global Logic to an extent is doing today in the space, what some of your portfolio companies are doing, just a broader sense of how this intermeshing of tech, product, and ops is going to happen, and how people need to think differently about scaling these businesses as opposed to scaling software sales businesses that
Right.
had been the mainstay over the last decade, 15 years or so.
Yeah, great point, Rohit. I think, look, when you're selling outcomes, then you do have to stitch together the entire outcome. And I think, you may have technology which does most of it, many times, but it still needs to be adopted. It needs to be integrated with internal systems, subsystems. Sometimes change management needs to happen. You can't transition suddenly, flip on a switch, so it's like a tapering down, tapering up, from one product to the other. So all these things which were earlier in our world called implementation engineers, implementation teams, system integration teams, now I think the modern word for them is forward engineers. And I think so we're definitely seeing that in our portfolio companies. I see Rex out for forward engineers, from our portfolio companies, which to me sound like the erstwhile system integrators, who are sort of understanding the customer systems, getting it implemented, have a little bit technical skill as well, stitch it together where it needs to be, a little bit problem solving, things like that. So that's definitely a new job role alongside prompt engineer, that has come up in the last year or two. So I think the extent, it's not clear to me if the sort of extent of it is going to be as massive as the SI became in erstwhile days. I think it's still early days. So we have to see how big it becomes. Like, but it should, at least in the near term, it should be a reasonable growth, according to me, because there's so many implementations happening.
Right.
I don't think the services companies, to my knowledge, have reoriented to
I
that today.
see.
Because it's all happening so quickly, and companies also work more with larger companies like SAPs, Oracles of the world, because they need a quanta of business. They can't really work with startups. The ticket size is just too small for it to move the needle for them. So I don't think service companies have warmed up to that opportunity
And
as of
if you
today.
look at the software companies themselves, the product
Mhm.
companies, the SaaS companies, how do you see them? I mean, obviously the role is very clear, as you said. It's only going to grow in the interim. To what extent we don't know.
Yeah.
But any advice for folks on how to think about building an FD function? How do you think about the ops and the people aspect of this? And that you're going to have to wear an operations hat even as a software and a product company, which maybe 5 years ago you didn't necessarily need to. You only wore a sales hat along with the tech hat, but now you're going to have to add ops. So, any
Yeah.
perspectives, any advice on how to maybe go about?
Yeah, it's a tough role. It's not like an R&D engineer's role. So I see some of the founders starting to do it themselves when they started, and then they kind of, because you do need to combine domain, business, customer, a little bit tech, a little bit problem solving and all that. So it's a high level role. It's kind of what you would call like the profile of people, or sort of like the product managers in the SaaS world, with some customer skills, are probably well placed to do these kind of things. But this is like I would say I see it growing to the extent of product managers, I would say. So
Interesting.
the way, if you see the number of product managers are there in the SaaS industry, we should have a similar number, if not more, of forward engineers. And it requires similar sort of cross-functional skills and things like that. So but I think, yeah, so I would look in those places as you build slightly more generalist with technical bent.